magnificent Mr. Toad and his crazy cronies, Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole, as they step out of the pages of Kenneth Graham's hilarious tale, The Wind in the Willows, as told by that inimitable storyteller, Basil Rathbone.
Hello, I'm Basil Rathbone. Not really, it's me, Grim. Oh, lovelies. We actually played Ironclaw not so long ago. You can find an after-action report on this channel, and you can find the game over on Grim Streams. That was this older edition, the revised first edition, I think. Perhaps. Anyway, so yeah, I inherited Ironclaw and Jadeclaw from a friend who had to get rid of his RPG collection, or at least most of it, which is a sad circumstance, but let's face it, I wasn't going to buy a furry RPG otherwise. And lots of people left comments or messaged me threatening to yiff me at gunpoint if I didn't also cover the newer edition, because they felt that the older edition didn't really reflect where Ironclaw and Jadeclaw were anymore. So, being a dumbass, I gave in and got a copy of the second edition Omnibus. Not the Clapham Omnibus, the second edition Omnibus. Do I need to go over the basics again? I don't know. But let's. Alright, so Ironclaw and Jadeclaw are anthropomorphic fantasy role-playing games. One's set in a sort of fantasy China. Ironclaw is set in a fantasy Europe. The second edition is much more Renaissance-y than the older edition was, which felt more like your standard sort of Dark Ages fantasy. That's a bit of a trend in fantasy games, and not one that I necessarily dislike. I much prefer early modern settings and games, so that's fine by me. Yes, it's a furry RPG, though their emphasis on the anthropomorphic, there are subtleties in how you describe things, and anthropomorphic is a kind of older term for these sorts of things. Right? So it's a bit more serious and a bit less about yiffing. Don't make me tap the no yiffing sign. So if you wanted to run a game based around anthropomorphic animals rather than necessarily furry animals in the other sense, then Ironclaw's not necessarily a bad idea for that. While reading this second edition, I found myself thinking quite often that it might make the good basis for a game system for playing in the world of Brian Talbot's anthropomorphic comic Grandville, which has a sort of Holmesian steampunk badger as the main character, and is a fun old read. So yeah, there's nuances here. I also felt going through this edition that it had attempted in a lot of ways to distance itself from the hypersexualized furry fandom to a large degree. A lot of the artwork is more Disney, or perhaps more accurately, it's more Don Bluth-y in a lot of ways, reminding me of alien designs from his various things, or creatures from Dragon's Lair or Space Ace, those sorts of things. I like Bluth more than Disney, so that's not a problem for me at all. Whether it's a problem for you or not, I don't know. But it does feel mostly like a conscious move away from the yiffing. I'm going to say yiff far more often than is necessary. during this review. I think I talked a fair bit, about the system and so on in my after action report and after the game that we played, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. This is going to be a bit more of a quicker overview, I guess. So yeah, this is less degenerate 4chan art and much more Disney or Warner Brothers or Don Bluth. Hence the opening that I chose, because the weasel character on the cover made me think of the weasels from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and the weasels in Who Framed Roger Rabbit are based off the ones from the relatively obscure Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, which I clipped out at the beginning. So yeah, that's why that's there. They do have a nice little summary of the changes between the editions, which is a nice thing to see. So fewer skills and more gifts. Gifts is now a sort of generic name for special powers and capabilities and animal traits to an extent. You have lower starting abilities, which is reflected throughout the system. The costs are flatter and easier, so there's less maths to do for that. When you get a bonus or a penalty, you don't step your dice up or down as you do in, say, Dungeon Crawl Classics anymore, which is what it used to do. Now instead you get more dice or less dice, as the case may be. Gifts can be exhausted and then brought back, which is a somewhat quicker and easier way of handling that. And most importantly, combat is far faster and far simpler, which is what everyone was telling me, because I kind of ad hoc simplified a lot of the combat and so on while we were playing, and so that was a lot more effective, I felt. And so those changes that I made on a sort of ad hoc basis are somewhat reflected in the way they've chosen to go. But whichever route you take, simplifying the old rules or going with the new, things are a lot quicker and easier. It retains the most important and useful part of the original Ironclaw and Jadeclaw games, I think, which is the neat way in which characters are built in layers. So you have your species, your career, your personality, local knowledge, skills, and gifts, and these stack up to give you your dice pools, which you then roll to accomplish whatever tasks it is you're attempting to accomplish. But it really emphasizes those different layers and levels and the choices that you make. Every species has a certain set of capabilities, and then you build on top of that with your career choice primarily and your skills and gifts secondarily. So yeah, that's I think the selling point for Jadeclaw and Ironclaw, whatever the edition, is the neat way in which it handles the different animal types, the different career types, and how that all stacks together. It's like layering templates one on top of another, a bit like how the Iron Kingdoms RPG that they produced themselves, you would pick two careers and they would be combined to create the output. Here it's more about race and career, but you get the idea. It's that layered character creation which creates all manner of different options. You're a little less tied to your character's species for gifts and special capabilities, but creating an exhaustive list of animals that people might want to play is clearly going to be impossible, because there are so many animals and people have so many attachments to different kinds of animals. So to me, their approach of just providing a few doesn't really work. It would be fine to have some as examples, if you also included rules for creating your own animals. I mean, you can anyway, and the existing ones provide some sort of guideline, but it would be far more robust and useful to have a massive list of traits that you could pick from, or traits associated with not species but maybe genus, for example, from which you could pick and choose ones to represent your particular animal or some real animal. There are standardized profiles for different species now, which does make creating custom ones a little bit easier than it used to be, but there's no proper support for it in the game itself. The game itself now feels a lot more Renaissance-y, the Middle Agey. Like I said, I don't have any problem with that. I know some people have strong opinions about black powder and firearms in their fantasy games, but get over it, man. Time marches relentlessly on, and you can always leave them out if you want to. It is interesting how our conception of the fantasy has kind of marched on with time as well, whereas we would have tended to have thought of knights and so on. Now we seem to think of the 1500s onwards instead. So the focus on history in fantasy games seems to have advanced about 200 years in about 20, which is kind of interesting. So the gifts are kind of like feats, to use the common language of TTRPGs, but also animal abilities and any other little things you might want to add. The artwork is less furry, more cartoony in a lot of ways. The presentation of the background and the presentation of the art, while tamer, is also less engaging in many ways. The overall bones of the game are the same. The rule system has been improved incrementally, simplified incrementally, but I found the whole book less of an engaging read than I did the previous ones. We've talked about editions before, right? And the second edition is usually, in my opinion, the best one. First editions are great because there's all the enthusiasm that kind of splurges out all over the page, right? People are excited about their idea, they're excited about getting it to print, but there's often problems in first edition of games that have to be ironed out, and so the second edition usually is where you kind of trim back, rationalize, simplify, cope with the issues, and that's generally the best edition. It retains some of the enthusiasm, but it's slightly more measured. I didn't realize reading the older editions how much the enthusiasm was overcoming my natural reticence about furry RPGs. And this one does feel a lot less enthusiastic. They spend a lot of time talking about rules, even though they're simplified. So there's a lot of it. And that can seem quite intimidating, given what is actually a fairly basic system, and one that they've simplified. They spend some time on their fantasy world, which was a bit of a problem with the previous one. I think with a lot of games, people are trying to publish their home campaign, which they're super into, but doesn't necessarily interest people outside in the same way until you reach a certain amount of critical mass community that's interested in it. I don't much care about their fantasy world, and does it really need to be presented in this much detail? to me, it would have been better to split out a world book to something else and to reduce the page count here and make the core book a lot cheaper, so that you can take the rules and then make your own worlds and your own characters and everything else. And I think that would better serve the fandom that is going to be most interested in this game as well. You know, they're into their OCs and everything else, and having a hidebound and lore heavy background to it that's going to be off-putting to what is probably going to be the core audience that they need to think about. So in some ways I like the disjointed art. Some of it looks like old woodcuts and so on, and that's nice. Most of it seems more Disney, Warner Brothers, Don Bluth, and a lot less Doug Winger or anime, which is fine, but I mean, have the courage of your convictions. I think it feels like they're holding back, and I get why they do it, but I think you need to have the courage of your own convictions when it comes to things like this. You're not going to win anyone over who doesn't like furry games by going really tame and Disneyfying, but you are probably going to alienate what is unfortunately your core audience by doing so. I get why they do it. I just think it's a bit of a misjudgment. So I'm not even through the book yet, but I don't have much more to say here, because so much more of it is on their particular world and so on, which I'm just not interested in. Sorry. In terms of style, then, I think it's both a step up and a step down. This is far more competently laid out and explained, so that's a huge advantage. But there is quite a space between the two editions, and you have to keep that in mind as well. So basically, between one thing and the other, I think it's kind of treading water on style. The artwork choice is one I don't agree with, but your mileage may vary. In terms of substance, there is a lot of what I consider to be wasted space because it's on their particular world that they're dead keen on, but the rest of us aren't necessarily going to be. I almost always, think including an adventure is a waste of time. It does have a decent index. The rules are better. There's a proper bestiary this time, which was nice to have. So the substance is a step up. But a lot of it is substance that you're not necessarily going to want or to use. So, style then 3, because it was average for the time before. Some things are better, some things are worse. Stays at 3. In substance terms, this is a much better, more complete book, and the underlying system is robust enough, and due to the way the species system and so on works, it would be a very good system to use for normal fantasy play, with fantasy races instead of animal races. So I think it has a lot more utility and scope than might otherwise appear to be the case, and it's neat for doing these sorts of things. And like I say, the basis here is a system that you could use for something of your own. Maybe you want to play a game like Titan AE, right? Science fiction is a bit of a step away, but the bones of the system are absolutely fine, even perfect for doing something like that. Or you might want to play a more serious Euro-style anthropomorphic game like Granville. So again, it's a very good choice for that. That one wouldn't take as much work at all. I might be tempted into running it again, perhaps, but no yiffing. Don't make me tap the sign. Zang.
Great. Greetings, Jerkian warrior elite. Know this, that your existence is down to the orders of our portly potentate, and that without him you would not exist. Your very conception in the clone tanks of Clonius, the cloning planet, is ordained by his obese omnipotence, and from that very moment you owe him your life, your servitude, and your loyalty. To be a soldier in the glorious army of the Jerkian Empire is perhaps the best fate that can befall lowly matter in this universe. The Jerkian Empire is all-conquering, all-powerful, has the best uniforms, the most advanced weaponry, and the greatest leader the galaxy has ever known. Nothing can stand in our way, and you, even as lowly as you are, can die knowing that you are serving a far greater cause and a far superior people to any other in the universe.
Invaders is a comedy game of mishap and alien adventure, where you play the part of diminutive and comedically and epically incompetent alien invaders. You can get it at post-mort.com and drive-through-RPG.
Just another rock called casualty. Getting high on mental casualty. Just